Kia ora everyone, welcome to the third of our Tackling Zero webinars. Lovely to have you with us here today. My name is Lachlan Forsyth. I'm going to be moving things along today. Tackling Zero is where we offer insights on topical sustainability issues, as well as stories on how we, our customers and partners, are going about that. Now, so far we've covered climate change, we've covered construction emissions. Today we are going to be talking about beer brewing, solar power, and how business can show real leadership in the sustainability space, amongst other things. Joining me today, as ever, is Meridian's Head of Sustainability, Tina Frew, and I'm thrilled to welcome Justin Merrell, who's Group Sustainability Director for Lion Group. Justin joins us from Australia, where he covers Lion's operations across Australia and New Zealand. Meridian and Lion have just partnered on an enormous solar array on the rooftop of Lion's flagship brewery, the Pride, and I look forward to talking more about that shortly. Welcome to you both, Tina and Justin. For everyone joining us, tiny bit of housekeeping. We've set aside some time for questions at the end of this session. Please just drop any questions into the Q&A function at the top of your screens there. If our session does run long and we don't have time, please email us at corporatecomms@meridianenergy.co.nz, but we hopefully will have a bit of time to get through your questions there. I'm going to kick things off with a question for both of you, starting with Justin. You're both in two very different industries, but both working towards a more sustainable future. So, Justin, starting with you, what does sustainability in a corporate context mean in practice for Lion?
Thanks, Lachlan, and hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. That's a big question. What does sustainability mean? I mean, I try and wrap it up into Lion wants to have a positive impact on the environment and the community. I think we try and keep it as simple as that. And to help us get there, we routinely undertake materiality assessments. They're a really good tool these days. There's even things called double materiality assessments as well. So getting a little bit more sophisticated how we understand how the business intersects with both the environment and the community. And that materiality assessment then goes on to inform our Force for Good strategy, which in turn helps us decide what to focus on. And for a brewer, obviously climate's a big one, water stewardship is a big one, the circular economy, when you think about all the bottles and the aluminium cans that we use, responsible consumption, probably the number one material issue for an alcohol producer. And then there are others as well, like human rights. I'd say what's different about the strategy that has just recently been refreshed and endorsed by the Lion board is that we're putting extra emphasis on working with the value chain, in particular the suppliers and the customers, because ultimately there's only so far that Lion can go on its own. And so really we've got to start looking over the fence now and understanding how we can essentially amplify our impact by working closer with the suppliers and the customers, as well as how we can support the brands in the marketplace with our sustainability credentials, and not forgetting the attracting talent and retaining talent in the business as well, which is often a nice side effect of doing sustainability well.
Thanks, Justin. Tina, same question. What does sustainability in a corporate context mean for Meridian?
Well, I think a chance for impact, really. So lots of common themes with what Justin was just sharing. But the first thing I think is a really good problem to have at Meridian is that there are so many great things you could choose to focus on. We've got a company strategy that's focused on climate action, but probably like anything in life, if you want to do it well, you need to prioritise and have focus. That materiality process that Justin was just referring to, that's how we go through and think about, what are those like big actual potential impacts we could have on people, planet, and the economy. So yeah, when you get really clear on those, that means you can really throw those resources at it and deliver some great stuff. So for us, some of the biggest impacts we have is around, growing renewable energy generation to help New Zealand decarbonise. So that's a huge focus for our business right now. And then kind of leaning into those other sectors. So what are the kind of new products and services we're going to offer customers like Lion to kind of reduce emissions? So that's a really big thing. I think the second last thing I'd say on corporate context sustainability is that it's a good opportunity for leadership. leadership. And I think there's a definite expectation out there from a lot of our stakeholders to pave the way. So it's definitely a role for large businesses in general. And I think that means there's some really exciting backing to lean into new emerging areas. That means you're needing to make choices where there isn't kind of a precedent set and innovation. That's certainly my experience in the role today, and it's something that keeps the job really interesting for me. So back to you, Lachlan.
You both obviously have years in the sustainability space. And as you go about delivering the work that you've just talked about there, how have you noticed attitudes or sustainability standards have changed in the last year, let alone maybe the last 5 years or so? Justin, could I start with you on that one?
Look, it's always changing. I think as a sustainability practitioner, you've always got to be aware of the pieces moving around you, and we have to continuously adapt to those changes, and we've got to stay positive ultimately, no matter what's thrown at us. And I mean, you've seen some great examples over the last 5 years in terms of, I got taught at university that, sustainability is like this three-legged stool, and there's an environment leg, and there's a social leg, and there's a financial leg. And if one of those legs is under stress, then typically the stool falls over. And, recently we've seen COVID have an impact on social stability. We've had I guess the effects of COVID when it comes to things like inflation and housing affordability. So both that social and financial leg, if you like, have been under a lot of stress over the last 5 years, and it means that the environment has to take a back step. I guess we don't put that as well focused as what we've done in the past. I think, leading into COVID, I've just got these images of, students marching down the streets in Sydney with, banners and calling out politicians for inaction on climate. There was such momentum, and then COVID hit and everything shifted. So, yeah, I think you have to be adaptable, and you have to be able to read the tea leaves, and you can't deny that these changes are happening. You've got to work with them. So, I think also the new mandatory disclosures, which are coming in globally as well, climate disclosures, which a lot of companies, in fact, New Zealand's already been through a year of that already, which brings into focus, again, the importance of working with your supply chain, particularly as you need to disclose your Scope 3 emissions. And as I said, I think there's just a lot of opportunities sitting in supply chain, because historically it's not an area that we've looked. Businesses are typically blinkered. They focus on their requirements, and that's why I feel at this point in time, as I said previously, looking over the fence and working with suppliers, I suspect there's going to be a lot of opportunity there.
And Tina, many changes in the energy space over the last couple of years that you've seen?
A lot, actually. I think, one, there's actually a growing number of really great career opportunities in the field that are literally changing year on year. So I think probably 4 or 5 years ago, most of us would have heard of sustainability manager type roles. But when I reflect on the changes in our business over that time, there are kind of a wealth of new roles that just didn't exist. So we've got a lot of very capable people helping us to develop and build these new generation assets, making sure that we're doing that in a way that's using sustainable construction practices, so all of that good waste circular economy stuff that Justin was pointing to. We're also employing people to roll out more of these projects to support customers kind of electrify their fleets, put solar on roofs. And there's some really, niche roles coming out around how do you, do, good quality financial disclosure of your sustainability work. So we've had a new climate accountant role in place. And I know probably definitely talking to some other peers in New Zealand, we're not alone in investing in this and developing our people. So I think we're all pretty clear that we need to have a good, capable workforce to deliver kind of what's needed ahead. I think the same thing Justin mentioned before is those sustainability standards and requirements have substantially changed, I would say, over this time. So I guess being able to evidence and substantiate what you're doing is definitely even different today to what it was, I would say, a year ago. So I think the motivations behind this are really great, like definitely enabling transparency, making sure we've got, good, clear comparability between organisations, things like that. But I think those of us that are in the profession would note like the workload impact from that. So, we're looking to always improve our processes and look at what tools we can bring on board to help have that good process in place, but make sure our talent is focused on delivering that real world good, to have those good stories to talk about. So that's a couple of things I've definitely noticed in recent years.
You've both mentioned the supply chain a couple of times in your respective answers there. Tina, can I just get you to expand on that a little bit, talking about sustainability within the supply chain? You've both got long, complicated, quite different supply chains there. Can they be challenging to influence?
Yes, challenging. I mean, you would typically, when you're starting out on something in your business, focus on your direct operations. So for Meridian, that's talking about, our staff here in New Zealand, the generation plants and vehicles we own, things like this. But as we've already kind of raised, probably the biggest influence that we can have is through that wider value chain. And most sustainability professionals would probably agree that there's definitely accountability that we need to have there. So for us, some of the work we've been doing in that space, definitely for a long time, we've been focused on emissions measurement with all of our suppliers. So that's everything, from the goods we buy and services we procure. So a big focus for us of late has been, how do we improve year-on-year data quality, work with those suppliers to minimise emissions in the first place from those goods and services we buy. And I guess over time that has expanded into things like modern slavery, due diligence, making sure workers in our supply chain have, good employment conditions. How do we strip waste out of manufacturing processes? For us in particular, noting the growth context of our sector in New Zealand, I think there's lots of good there around, significant new local employment opportunities. Things like that. But I would say, yes, sustainability is more challenging. It's not your direct operations, but I think just start by starting and focus on like the most material areas first and go from there.
And Justin, very different supply chain, obviously, in the brewing business, but were you hearing many things that Tina was saying there that also are applicable to your supply chain?
I think so. I think it's challenging because we are not conditioned for these types of conversations with the supply chain. It's still relatively new. So being new, it just takes time to build these relationships. And Tina, touched on data there. You need trust ultimately if you're going to be sharing this type of information, which historically you haven't shared. We did a great example with the Australian Climate Leaders Coalition a few years back. I think it's still on their website. We did Scope 3 roadmap, but what we did differently was that we invited the full value chain into the same room, like physically the same room, and we had a conversation about how we were going to exchange carbon emission data, because ultimately we were all kind of wanting to achieve the same outcomes. So we all needed this information, and we knew we'd be better off with the actual information and not an emission factor taken out of a textbook. So actually sitting around the table and talking about carbon emission data and how we're going to exchange it and what we're going to use it for, what support we needed from the CEOs to enable the transaction of that information was a really great step. Not only in actually getting our hands on the data, which was, I guess, the core purpose, but in the background at the same time, we ultimately were building trust in the supply chain, and just opening to those conversations, which historically, businesses don't typically tend to focus on. It's really boiled down to good price and reliable supply in the past, but now we're just starting to introduce more and more sustainability components to that conversation.
Just building on what you're talking about there, Lion is clearly, aspiring to be a leader in this space. So what are some of the practical measures that Lion is doing? And did there have to be a major shift in culture and outlook to allow that to happen?
A great example recently in our supply chain was what we call Project Green Bullet, which is working with Visy, who are our major packaging supplier. They supply aluminium cans and bottles. But also Visy working with Novelis, who make the aluminium stock for those cans, and Rio Tinto that actually produce the aluminium. And we had this desire to maximise the recycled content in our aluminium cans. And so we worked with Rio Tinto and Novelis and Visy and Lion And we came up with this can which contained 83% recycled content, and that was an increase of around 30% on our current can. And so that reduced carbon emissions by around 60%. So it's this really beautiful demonstration of what happens when a supply chain works together to a common objective. And in this case, it was maximising recycled content in our packaging, which had this lovely sort of benefit of not only minimising resources, but also reducing carbon emissions, because as you know, it takes far less energy to produce recycled a can out of recycled aluminium as it does out of virgin aluminium or primary aluminium. So, a really solid example of the importance of, working together as a supply chain. I think closer to home, I joined Line about 7 years ago now, but, just so privileged to work in an organisation that's so focused on, energy efficiency and water efficiency, and have really great metering and really solid systems, really fabulous support from the leadership team here at Line, and making these decisions like the one we've recently made with the Pride and the Solar project. So I would say, there wasn't a major shift in culture required. I think it was just about, focusing on when is the right time to be doing these projects. And I think that's the importance of having a good relationship with the likes of Meridian. We know, what's feasible, what's not feasible today, may be feasible tomorrow, which I think played out really well in this solar project. I mean, when I started a Line, I was told many, many times it wasn't possible to put panels on the roof of the Pride. But by staying close to, the technical developments and the commercial developments, and having that sort of relationship with Meridian, where we could, routinely test what the state of the nation was and whether or not things had changed sufficiently to give the project another run. If we didn't have that relationship, and if we weren't alert to those possibilities, then the project wouldn't have happened.
Thanks, Justin. Just a reminder to everyone to drop any questions you might have into the Q&A function up the top here. Otherwise, it's going to end up in some dead air at the end of this. And while we might get away a little bit earlier, that's probably about 20 seconds of awkwardness I don't really want. So, Tina, just touching on what Justin raised there about the solar project, it's 2,500 panels on the roof of the Pride there. You can actually see it as you fly into Auckland Airport. We're seeing more of these sorts of deals, electrification of industrial heat, solar arrangements. Are corporates making the progress needed here?
So progress, is definitely being made. I think the energy sector in particular in New Zealand is one example undergoing, I'd say, unprecedented transformation this decade to help New Zealand and everyone that's a part of that meet its climate goals. So some of those projects you raised are definitely things that businesses are taking action on now, like Lion. So actually talking about the Australian Climate Leaders Coalition, we actually have the same here in New Zealand. So if any of you haven't heard of that, it's made up of around 80% of, 80 organisations who represent about 30% of New Zealand's GDP. So a pretty reasonable cohort. And it was kind of interesting in their last kind of annual stock take of the action that those organisations are getting after, that about 2/3 of those organisations had decreased direct emissions. So that was quite a step up from the year prior. And probably around that proportion again, we're working with their supply chains also. So we've just talked about that as definitely an emerging frontier of focus for sustainability professionals, and the type of action that they're taking is all of those things like decarbonising fleets, purchasing renewable energy, that type of thing. And great to see an escalating focus on climate risk and businesses kind of enhancing resilience to get ready for a changing climate. So there's also lots of other interesting agreements out there, like demand response is something that's really scaling in our sector. So, a prime example for us was the work we did with the New Zealand aluminium smelter to set that up, and that was something that came online last winter when there was a tight electricity supply at the moment, and that provided a really material service to New Zealand. So there's lots of different things coming to the table that is being achieved by partnering with others. I think probably stepping back as a globe, most of us probably know we're behind where most sustainability professionals would like the world to be. There's still some work to do to kind of operate in a way where we're kind of living within the bounds of what our home can sustainably support over the longer term, which is why I think it's kind of more important than ever to deliver those results and really hone in on the most material things that you can do to make a difference and put your resources towards those and do them really well.
Justin, as we mentioned, you're joining us today from Australia. Looking broadly, are there any key differences in attitudes towards sustainability between New Zealand and Australia that you have noticed?
Well, there's some very obvious ones. I mean, I'm very jealous of the low emission grid in New Zealand. I guess there's be a good debate at some point in time as to whether or not New Zealand has made full use of that position and just watching it. But obviously, as Tina's saying, we're starting to see a bit more process heat electrification. I think New Zealand obviously took a lead on heat pumps. We were certainly looking to New Zealand in Australia as to their leadership on the adoption of heat pumps and getting some great case studies that we could refer to as we were building our own business cases. So that was very welcomed. The lack of a natural gas network on the South Island's also curious as to how that's played out, and we've seen reliance on coal for process heat in some of the industries on the South Island as well, and to that effect that the government has stepped in and provided some funding to transition out of the coal-fired boilers and move into other low-emission fuels. So that's obviously a good transition to observe. Quick shout out to ECA as well. I'd be really silly of me to miss an opportunity to thank them for all their support, over the last 5 years to help Lion decarbonise and for sticking with us as the circumstances change and the business cases were rewritten. It's just been fabulous working with that organisation. I think the attitudes, I think Australia's obviously been focused a lot on the coal transition. I think New Zealand focuses on agriculture. Typically, politically, climate has forever been a hot potato in Australia, and it's really held us back, unfortunately. But nevertheless, that's the way that it is. In New Zealand, I guess it hasn't been a smooth road either. But I'd say on the whole, there's probably been more bipartisanship support on climate than there has in Australia. And I think overall, you've got the most gorgeous backyard in New Zealand, and I'd say as a consequence of that, sustainability I would suggest just is a little bit more ingrained in New Zealand's culture, where it tends to be a little bit more divisive in Australia. And I think that really comes back to the fact that we're depending on coal and we're depending on mining, large scale agriculture and grazing. So yeah, it's a bit of a different mix, but overall I'd say New Zealand just feels a bit warmer over there when you're talking about sustainability. But I'm not surprised given the environment over there. I'd be really concerned if you didn't care more about your environment.
Thanks, Justin. We've started to have a couple of questions drop in now. We'll try and rattle through one final question first with both of you, and then we can start getting into the Q&As here. Basically, I think we can sort of move to some closing remarks here, and whether you see potential for other corporates considering the benefits when a company like Lion and Meridian work together. Can you see others emulating this, perhaps, Tina?
Definitely. So I think there's huge opportunities for businesses to get on with it and deliver. I think most businesses will be clear that sustainability action is what you need for long-term value creation. I know Justin talked about being adaptable and the balance that's needed. And I think deep down we all know that in that long-term sustainable action means you're here in the future doing the right things. So we're in this really exciting transition period where I think we can do some super innovative things like we have by partnering with Lion. And as I think I said at the start, the great problem to have at Meridian is choosing the mahi you want to get after, because there's so many good things you could do. But yeah, just really focus on those most material things and get behind it and deliver what we need.
Anything you'd like to add before we jump into some Q&A here, Justin?
Just reiterating the importance of building those long-term and transparent relationships with your supply chain and your value chain more broadly, and even the industry as a whole. We just need to improve the level of collaboration, because you will soon start to max out how far you can go alone as an organisation, and really the next opportunities have to be within that value chain and with the industry. And just as I said, keeping the conversations live. It took over 5 years for the solar project to, for the stars to align, as I said previously, and unless we're in constant contact with Meridian and really testing the project feasibility from time to time, it wouldn't have happened. So I guess for some, get out of that comfort zone and build those relationships and be a little bit more courageous as to where the opportunities are by working together.
Lovely, thank you. We're going to jump to some questions now. I'm going to start with this one from Simon, which is, how did consumer pressure play a part in Lion's decarb strategy, Justin?
I would say not too much. I guess we're a carbon neutral organisation. We're a certified carbon neutral in New Zealand as well as Australia. We probably would have liked to have seen a little bit more cut through with the consumers on that commitment. Nevertheless, we're stuck with that commitment. We understand that's really the last lever we've got to pull whilst we've still got emissions that we can't eliminate. So we stay with carbon offsetting as a last resort. But yeah, I would say not as much as I would have liked, if I could be completely transparent. We often talk about sustainability credentials and willingness to purchase, that green premium. It's got lots of different names. But it's very elusive. It's very it's challenging to measure, and it's challenging to prove. It's the holy grail for myself, being in FMCG. If I could sort of correlate sustainability credentials and willingness to purchase, I think that'd be a wonderful thing. But it remains challenging, but I'm not giving up.
And one for Tina. This is from Sarah asking, are there any regulatory levers you're asking the government to pull to help you achieve your sustainability objectives?
Yeah, I think we've definitely had conversations with government around the types of policies that can really help accelerate or bring forward some of that carbon action. So I think we talked before about the process heat opportunity. So we were, pretty favourable of things like the GIDI fund when that was in effect. It really helped reduce some of those upfront capital barriers for customers, and that one in particular was something that worked really well for us. Some of the great work ECA is doing as well, all of these types of things help us solve some nifty challenges to work through. I think the team were recently working on a Springs Junction charging site, which would have been really challenging to make work on our own, but actually by working with the likes of ECA and customers, we were able to find a way through and bring to market this charging site in a way where it otherwise might not happen for quite some time. So I think we definitely need some good policies, and really I think at the end of the day, the central thing is having a good emissions trading scheme in place where carbon is priced fairly. I think that's the big kind of green thing we all want to aim for, and then it's like where additional policies are needed to address like specific barriers, take a look at those.
I'm going to try and squeeze in 2 more questions in the last couple of minutes we've got. So we're going to try and keep our answers relatively short there. Starting with you, Justin. This question from Tim, who's very interested to hear what's next for Lion over the next few years. Any other decarbonisation initiatives identified?
Yes, we're obviously, well, not obviously, some of you may not be aware that we're putting in our first electric boiler down at Spates in Dunedin later this year, again with the assistance of Meridian and a long-term power contract for that operation. So that's super exciting, first in the network. And we're also looking at process heat electrification opportunities in Australia as well. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a lot of rooftop solar in Australia. Wholesale prices for electricity go negative during the day. There's too many green electrons getting on the grid. So there's a big opportunity, I think, for industry to come in and soak some of those up in the middle of the day. So some of these new electrical thermal energy storage technologies, like these big graphite blocks, could be very useful for that type of dynamic and that type of pricing. So yeah, definitely some really exciting opportunities on the horizon.
And Tina, I'm really going to put the pressure on you here with this question from Lincoln. I'm keen to hear what's worked well for Meridian when it comes to developing in-house capability and attracting talent towards sustainability roles. You've got 25 seconds, Tina, go.
25 seconds. I mean, one thing is that there is no problem attracting people that are interested in this stuff. I'm a big believer in applied learning. So I think giving people opportunities by getting hands-on in projects, and some of the greatest opportunities we've seen have actually in recent years been our big sustainable construction projects. So there's lots of opportunities for emissions, waste, local employment. How do you minimise water reduction, that type of thing. So that's my 25 seconds on the spot.
Nicely done. Thank you very much. That's it for our latest webinar. Thank you to our speakers, Tina, Frew and Justin Merrell. Thank you all for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed it and learned something here. If you do have any other questions, please feel free to email us at corporatecomms@meridianenergy.co.nz. I can see a couple we couldn't quite get to. I'll try and email those after this. We'll pop a recording of this up on our LinkedIn and YouTube pages. That's it for now. Ka kite anō.
Thank you.